Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Vallely from Transport for the South East. And what I'm going to do today is to show you how we can potentially use the tool to help us, particularly in formulating our action plans to meet carbon reduction goals. Now, what I'm going to do is use a transport example. As Malcolm has demonstrated, there's a rich set of information in the tool, but I'm going to go down a transport avenue because that's a bit of the sector that I'm particularly concerned with. Just very quickly, Transport for the South East is one of 7 subnational transport bodies that are covering all of England. Our mission, very broadly, is to identify the large-scale transport improvements that will deliver sustainable economic growth. And this map just shows the geography that we cover. We represent 16 local transport authorities within that area. And part of our vision statement is we've adopted the government target of achieving net zero by 2050. But like many of you in the audience today, the thing that we're currently focused on is what's the trajectory to that point. As Gillian's already illustrated, the journey is more important than the arrival point. So what I'd like to say, Gillian in her presentation just highlighted a number of particular uses for the tool. I'm just going to focus today on 2 areas, which is about identifying target areas and sectors and the benchmarking aspect, particularly focusing when we're thinking about developing our action plans to decarbonise locally, about how the tool can potentially help us. So what I want to do is just focus within my geography, just use an illustrative example of comparing Wealden district, a rural district with a population of about 160,000 people in various small towns and villages, compared to coastal urban area of Eastbourne with a population of about 100,000. Now, just looking at the estimated annual carbon footprint, we can start to see some patterns starting to emerge. But as Gillian's identified in her talk, everyone is starting from a very different place, and we can see even within this area, we've got quite contrasting levels of average emissions from within those places, and even within Eastbourne as an urban area, there's quite contrasting levels of emissions. And as Malcolm's identified, what the tool enables us to do is to compare a particular district. So here we're looking at Eastbourne compared to the England average, and just see how its carbon footprint is comprised and how it compares overall, and how the different sectors compare. So we can see here that the number of flights taken by people in Eastbourne is significantly lower than the English average. And just sort of generally, you can see that for many of the segments here, which are shown across the top of the slide, Eastbourne has a lower levels of emissions across the board. If we start to look and delve a little bit more into the transport area, just looking at Eastbourne's carbon emissions from cars and vans, you can see it's lower than the England average. We compare that with the Wealden district, the rural area, though, you can see quite markedly that has far higher levels of emissions from cars and vans. Well, and this is the sort of pattern that we would expect. Just delving in a little bit more, the tool enables us to, and Malcolm's put some very useful data in there that enables us to compare the levels of travel to work trip share as one example. And here we can see the pie charts show us the proportion of people travelling to work by different modes. And as we would expect, comparing a rural and an urban area, we can see that Eastbourne has a far lower levels of commuting by car and van, shown in red, than Wealden district. But we can also start to sort of see some, thinking about our action planning, this is usefully showing us sort of what people do at the moment. And we can see within Eastbourne, we've got far higher levels of people cycling, walking. But by contrast, if we look to Wealden, we can see a far more significant proportion of the people are working from home. And obviously this is something to think about when we're thinking about our action planning. What is our ability to maybe capitalise on that? Just if you're wondering about the segment shown around the outside of the pie chart, this is data from the tool, the propensity to cycle tool that Malcolm referenced, which shows the potential propensity of people in those two areas to cycle. So the green segment, the light green segment, shows in the future what the propensity of people living in those two areas to cycle may well be. And you can see we've got unsurprisingly, a far higher propensity to cycle in Eastbourne compared to the rural Wealden district. So just going back out, zooming back out, just looking at the overall carbon footprint, as I sort of said, we're very contrasting patterns of use across the area, and different levels of emissions. But if we delve into the whole the area of car and vans again, we start to see some sort of clear patterns emerging, and a contrast between generally rural area and urban Eastbourne, far lower levels of emissions from cars in Eastbourne compared generally to the Wealden district, the rural area. Now, just to zoom in a little bit more and just sort of see how we can start to then focus and think about these different areas. You can see within the middle area there is some sort of quite contrasting levels of emissions from car use. So we have the ability, just zooming in on that area, to zoom in at these three interesting LSOAs as to why there are these contrasting levels of emissions from car use. And as Malcolm sort of has illustrated, the tool enables us to look at the ONS classification of those areas, and we can see, or I wouldn't suggest that the pictures will appear, but just to give you a flavour of what these two contrasting, the dark red area and the light blue area, they have different ONS classifications. So ageing rural neighbourhoods, the light blue, prospering countryside life, the dark red, which starts to sort of give us the information about potentially why we're seeing these different levels of car use. As Malcolm said, we can delve down and look at frequency of public transport use at stops. And as he said, there's the grading system to look at the frequency of stops. Now, if we look at, there are bus services in both the dark red LSOA and the light blue. But if we look at the frequency of those stops, all of them in the dark red area classified as worst performing. Some of the worst performing, you can see this one only has 5 stops per week. it's a school service which is available to members of the public. But by contrast, if we look into the light blue area, we can see that this has the bus stop here, this particular one, a far higher level of service. And obviously, looking at this information and thinking about the sort of the concept that Gillian introduced of avoid, shift, improve, the sort of information that the tool is providing us with is enabling us to think about in our action planning the different sorts of emphasis that we need to play on these 3 pillars of this in those different areas, with clearly potentially the need to think in rural areas about the need, more emphasis on the need to avoid and reduce the need to travel. We saw that there's more home working already in the rural area, rural Wealden compared to Eastbourne. Maybe we need to capitalise on that. The shift to environmentally friendly modes. So thinking about is there potential? There is a bus service in those areas. Is there the potential to increase the frequency of that and get more people travelling using the bus? Or is it the case on the improved side that with the high levels of car use, our focus has got to be in this rural context on potentially emphasising the need to shift to EVs as one of the sort of the central pillars of what we do. So there we are, just a quick run through of some of the information in the tool and how it may help us formulate our thinking about our action plans to help us decarbonise within our local areas. And I'll finish it there.